Welcome to the Midnight Bible Study, where I deliver unordained theology, typically in a state of exhaustion and sleep deprivation. Tonight we're going to talk about no half measures. No half measures for God is the topic of tonight's Bible study. And, a perfect example of no half measures. It doesn't take you don't have to be a big hero or a strong man to have no half measures. Look at King David. King David was, of course, just a little boy when he defeated Goliath. He went, and the king laughed at him when he said he wanted to fight Goliath and forbid it. But finally, he, David said, "Look, I'm not fighting him. I'm not going to stand here while this guy is out here making a mockery of the army of Israel and our God." And so finally, he went out there and fought him, and he said to Goliath, he said, "You come at me with a sword and with a spear, but I come at you in the name of the Lord of hosts." And he went out and with that little, there was Goliath standing 7 foot tall with his sword and his spear and his shield, and yet this little boy had his slingshot and defeated him. So you don't have to be strong to have iron will and be ready to back God up with faith and no half measures. Look at Paul, the Apostle Paul. He certainly was not one for half measures. He writes, and nor was he necessarily a great warrior. He actually calls himself a fool. He says, "Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool." This is in 2 Corinthians 11:23. "I speak as a fool. I am more in labors, more in abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths often." This is a guy who's going around getting whipped and thrown in prison, and he calls himself one who speaks as a fool, because he's, of course, speaking of going against the worldly system. He writes, "3 times I was beaten." He writes, "3 times I was beaten with rods. Well, from the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes, minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been in the deep, in journeys often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils of the city, in perils of the wilderness, in perils of the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. Besides the other things, what comes upon me daily? My deep concern for all the churches. Who is weak? And I am not weak. Who is made to stumble? And I do not burn with indignation. If I must boast, I will boast in the things which concern my infirmity." So he's boasting about his sickness, his weakness. And yet he's willing to go through anything. And why? He says it's his concern for the churches. My deep concern for all the churches. He was not one for half measures. What about Jesus? I think we all know Jesus was not one for half measures. In fact, it says, "In being found in the fashion of a man," this is Philippians, "in being found in the Philippians 2:8, "and being found in the fashion of a man," Jesus, "he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even death on the cross." No half measures there. He was willing to be obedient to God, even to death on the cross. No half measures there. What about Joan of Arc, little fragile little girl, literally a child who was a devout little child, and was known for having visions. She had visions of saints, and was in these visions was spoken to by Saint Catherine and the Archangel Michael, and was told to go and lead the armies of France to victory, which obviously would seem absurd to most adults. And so she went anyway and approached the Robert de Baudricourt, French commander at Vaucouleurs, and he laughed at this little child for her absurd idea that she was going to be the one to lead the forces to victory. But she went on and made a prophecy about how things were going to turn out for him at the Battle of Herrings. And unfortunately for him, they turned out just like Joan said, in defeat. And so he decided to give her a chance. And she was allowed to lead an expedition to relieve the besieged French forces at Orleans. And she led them to victory. She led this little child who had been laughed at, and yet was not interested in half measures. She was interested in obedience to her journey, to her mission. And she led the French forces to victory. What about Caleb, who in the Bible, Caleb is really one of the heroes of the Old Testament. It says he was invincible in driving out giants, completely devoted to God. So half measures? No, it says he was completely devoted to God. How devoted was he? He was invincible in driving out giants. So this guy would go out and fight giants, literally. These are the same giants that the entire nation of Israel refused to fight, and they would rather spend 40 years in the desert than go up into the land of milk and honey and fight these giants. But Caleb was one of only two who said, no, let's go up on the hill, for we are well able to overcome it. It took him 40 years before he was able to do it, but because everyone else backed down. But he did it, and he was invincible in driving out giants, completely devoted to God. 6 times it is recorded of him, he hath faithfully followed the Lord. So he had faithfully followed the Lord, even when the Lord was seemingly giving him a dangerous path forward, a dangerous mission, so dangerous that the entire nation of Israel backed down from it. So we could go on and on with stories of incredible heroics and miracles based on Bible heroes who were not interested in half measures. They were interested in obedience to God. God bless you, and good night from the Midnight Bible Study. Good night.